Good evening to everyone present with us today. Talking Films Online welcomes everyone to the session today, dated 11th April 2026. I'm Shrija, your anchor for this evening. I will introduce the platform for those who are joining us for the first time. Talking Films Online is an online platform inaugurated and run by two professors, namely Dr. Nikhila and Geeta Vishwanath. Talking Films Online began as their brainchild 5 years ago with the intent of preserving human connection through cinema. The platform has been supported by interns, volunteers, and the countless directors and scholars who join us. We gather every Saturday, every week at 9 p.m. sharp as per the Indian Standard Time. The simple task for the members of the team is to watch the film that is given every week prior to our discussions on Saturday. We have had the pleasure of engaging with several eminent personalities such as Aparna Sen, Amol Palekar, Girish Kasaravali, Jayant Cherian, and Adur Gopalakrishnan. We celebrate criticism on the craft of songs, methodologies, narratives, and the literature in the realm of cinema at large across genres, languages, and nations. Talking Films Online has been conducting a short film making competition every June ever since our establishment. We organize lectures in departments with faculties at different universities. We successfully conducted our first offline international seminar on Indian cinema in the digital era in collaboration with FCT Baroda. Of our most recent records, our platform has met over an international conference at Asansol, West Bengal in November 2025, which was presided over by an international slew of participants as well. Tonight, we are joined by Basav Biradar, who will initiate a discussion on the 1975 film Welfare. Basav Biradar is a writer, filmmaker, and a film educator. His writing has appeared in leading publications in India, including The Karwa, Outlook India, National Geographic Traveler, India, The Hindu, The News Minute, Film Companion, Open Magazine, Frontline India, Mint Lounge, etc. As a film researcher and critic, Birada has curated and presented retrospective of Girish Kasaravali and has anchored conversations on the work of filmmakers such as Girish Kasaravali, Syed Akhtar Mirza, G. Aravindan, and Adur Gopalakrishnan. His non-fiction films have been widely screened in India. He teaches at Srishti Manipur Institute in Bangalore. Mr. Biradar has been a part of selection panels at several film festivals, including Chennai International Documentary Festival and Bangalore International Film Festival. He was also invited to Berlin 2025 to be a part of the Forum Expanded section of the festival. The stage is all yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Can I share the PPT?
Yes, sir. You can. I've enabled the option to share for all the participants.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, are you all able to see the slides?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about Frederick Wiseman and screen one of his seminal films, Welfare. Early films also. It is one of his early films because he kept working all his life. So this is an old photograph of his which I wanted to use because he died at the age of 96, so I didn't want to use recent photograph. So this is a photograph from uh, 60s where you can see him on his Steinbeck machine on editing table. Okay, to begin with, just a little bit a biographical information about Frederick Wiseman. He was actually a son of a Jewish immigrants who was born in Boston, in the United States. His father was a lawyer, and he also, as many Jews of the time, tended to be middle-class Jews. He either wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer. So he ended up going to Yale University to study law and then became a law university professor at Boston University. But his interest was not really in law, so he didn't last long. His first film, his debut film, is called Titicut Follies, which he made in 1967 as a director. Prior to making this documentary, Titicut Follies, he actually produced one fiction film called A Cool World. Uh, that is when he says that he learned how what filmmaking involves, and he kind of also felt frustrated that he was not in control of the filmmaking because he was not the director. So he then decided to make his own films, and since then he has been making one film per year almost. So he's made 47 films from 1967 to 2023 was his last film, and he died very recently in February 2026. Some of his Ticket Follies, for example, his debut feature was a film where he was teaching law at the time, so he wanted to take his students, like he says, the quote here on the right. When I was teaching, I took the students on field trips to trials in prisons and mental hospitals, probation board hearings, and one of the places I took them to is Bridgewater because I wanted them to see where their clients might end up if they didn't if they didn't represent them properly. So this is like an asylum, a state asylum in Bridgewater, New Jersey. So he shot the when he took his students, he thought, why not make a film on this? And he got permissions, etc., and shot the film. And the permissions took him almost close to a couple of 2 years. Uh, and that film kind of defined his method, his style of filmmaking, and from first film itself. But it was not without problems in the sense, obviously, he ran into censor issues. There was a issues of, it was called as an obscene film. And so it was not passed by the censor for theatrical screenings, but somehow he got some schools, universities interested in it, and then that became his starting. It was eventually screened in theaters many years later, when the earlier ruling on the film of censor by the court was repelled. Um, so that's how it started from him, and the prison or asylum that he started from kind of anchored his idea of working with institutions. So he went on to make films on institutions. Some of his notable films are High School, which is obviously, as the title suggests, set in a high school, a public high school. Then a hospital, which is in an emergency ward of a hospital in the US. In Jackson Heights is about the suburb Jackson Heights in New York, New Jersey, and at Berkeley is a film about University of Berkeley. I mean, I really wanted to show that because I really like that film, but it's quite long. It's like 3 hours, 55 minutes or something. So many of his films are very long. Like if you remember, we had watched Ex Libris, the New York Public Library film in TFO 2 years ago. That also was about 3.5 hours. Monrovia, Indiana is on a small town called Monrovia, Indiana in 2018, and it is like a complete white town, middle class white small town. And it's again a very fascinating evocation at a time when Trump was elected in 2016. And later on, many critics pointed out that Monrovia had like 80% voting for Trump. So it became kind of a document of the kind of society the small town white America is with through this film. Then there's of course the film Public Housing in Chicago, then Boxing Gym. Um, a lot of his, I mean, his beginning of his film is also, if you know documentary film history, 1960s was when documentary broke out of the earlier mold of expository style with a voiceover explanation and voiceover recorded in the studio, that is, and some shots taken, and which was mainly because of the kind of film equipment, which was there at that time, which was very difficult to, for example, sync sound recording was not available at that time. So there were no portable tape recorders or microphones which you could take and record, and there were no 16 cameras. So in the 60s, some of the filmmakers, when once a 16 camera was invented and the sync tape recording was invented, that technological evolution led to some very interesting kind of filmmakers. So for example, Mays brothers, Robert Drew and his group, and Richard Lecoq in the US. And then also, of course, we might know from France, Jean Rouch and Edgar Morin, who made the seminal film A Chronicle of a Summer in 1961. And that led to a style of film which is known as direct cinema, or in America it's known as direct cinema. In France and elsewhere is known as cinema verite, which basically means the true cinema. So that was a key influence on him, because that was all early 60s. And in one of his interviews, he said how he watched one of the films made by Robert Drew and Associates, and realized that's the kind of style he would use in his filmmaking. So not a so his it's notable to realize that his filmmaking was made possible due to the technological evolution, and at the same time of some innovation by the early documentarians in 60s. Uh, some of the features I just thought, which are, for it's very useful to, or rather, it's very easy to summarize Weisman's films because they follow a similar approach throughout his career of 47 films. It doesn't change at all. For example, formally, his method is observational. There are no interviews, no voiceovers. No interviews in the sense there are no direct interviews. The film, which was the traditional conventional documentary before this, that there is no external music or score which is deliberately created for the film, sound score. So that is not there. The uh, as you might have noticed in Welfare, there are long takes, as the scene unravels a particular scene, and his camera keeps observing what happens. Sometimes, like if you nowadays there is digital humanities where they analyze short lengths in films, and if you analyze short lengths of films, you'll realize some of his shots are way longer than other films. So that was formally and thematically, he became interested, I think, probably because of his law background as an instant interest in how institutions work. So many of his films are focused on examining or investigating American public and private institutions, including institutions like a boxing gym, for example, not just school or hospital or a military training camp, etc. So that is his primary concern. Later on, he also became interested in small towns. So he kind of made a few films, like I talked about Monrovia, Indiana. He's interested in documenting life in American small towns. So these are two thematic concerns which he worked throughout his career. Interestingly, Wiseman is someone who was never commissioned to make a film. He always produced his own films and distributed them. His company, which even today distributes films, is called Zipporah Films. Zipporah was his wife's name. She died in 2021, who was also a lawyer. So he named his film company on his wife. And all his films he self-produced and distributed, never went through studios or commissions from the state or anyone else for that matter. So very unique in terms of how he lived on his on the money his films made, although his films were mostly considered educational and were used widely in universities and schools. For example, in universities in US, you will always have a Frederick Wiseman collection, complete collection, licenses bought from the Zipporah film. So that's something he managed to do, and that's how he sort of made a living as well. Some very interesting thoughts he had on documentary. He did not like the term documentary or observational cinema, which I am using it here deliberately for ease of explanation, or even the term fly on the wall, which was used a lot by Maysles brothers. For example, if you are aware of the Maysles brothers' seminal film Grey Gardens, it's they call themselves fly on the wall, as in the camera is just a fly. and what like a fly, just watching what is happening and recording it. But Wiseman said, "No, I'm not just a fly. I have consciousness, and I'm making decisions every minute of what to shoot." So he did not like the term observational cinema, fly on the wall, or documentary, because he said it's not documentary, it is constructed, it's not reality. And he liked to call his films non-fiction dramas. He always worked only with three people crew, which is very interesting, one of which is him. He directed, he has edited all his films. And then he also recorded, he also was the sound recorder on the shoot. So apart from him, there was always one cameraman and one assistant cameraman. That's it. So only three people crew, which is a very DIY or do-it-yourself kind of filmmaking approach he landed upon. So once he decided on these themes and approach, it seemed what is remarkable, I feel, is that conviction of his approach is very remarkable, because he did not change it at all throughout his career, starting from 60s till 2020s. He did not change his approach to filmmaking at all. He did not get influenced by the many innovations, etc., or influenced by, say, the festival circuit or any of that kind. So that is very remarkable for from an artistic perspective, to think of how artists work. These are some of the features, and here's a quote from early on from his filmmaking days, where he says, "What I'm aiming at is a series on American institutions, using the word institutions to cover a series of activities that take place in a limited geographical area with a more or less consistent group of people being involved. I want to use film technology to have a look at places like high schools, hospitals, prisons, and police. I want to get away from what I consider to be the typical documentary where you follow one charming person around." This is an interesting quote, and while it also sort of critiques this idea, which unfortunately still exists in documentary cinema, where they feel especially fostered by the film festivals overall. For example, we have recently seen, even in India, films like All That Breathes or Writing with Fire, which are so focused on finding a character and following the character around. And that's something he was not interested in, and he wanted to go against the grain, so to say. So, and I really think that is the crux of his method, because it sets that's what sets him apart, and he was not the only one doing it. Of course, there were some ethnographic filmmakers also, and some more filmmakers who were influenced by Frederick Wiseman, like, for example, the Japanese filmmaker Kazuhiro Soda. Right. There's another quote from him, which sort of reveals a little bit of his process. He says, "When I come back from the shoot, a couple of weeks after I come back, I start looking at the rushes. That takes me 6 to 8 weeks. And then I make notes about what I am seeing and hearing. At the end of that 6 to 8 weeks, I put aside about 50% of the material. And then over the next 6 or 8 months, I edit all the sequences that I think I might use in the film. And it's only when I edited all the so-called candidate sequences in close to final form that I begin to work on the structure. But both the structure and the thematic considerations are something that evolve at the end of the editing as a consequence of total immersion in the material during the period of the editing." This is something which personally also fascinates me, and I've tried to work in this mode, not obviously at the level of Frederick Wiseman, but it's and I think that's what documentary form allows us, or nonfiction form allows us to do, like, to kind of get into a project where you don't know anything, and you just sort of, while you're recording and then revisiting those recorded footage, is when you sort of make sense of it, instead of, say, for example, the conventional documentary where you're scripting and then going and filming, and then sort of or researching, scripting, and then going and filming, and then coming back and editing it as per your script. But in this method, first thing you do is, go and film it. So you film for example, sometimes Wiseman filmed for months, sometimes he filmed for weeks. It depends on how what subject it is, and then you sit in the edit and you figure out what is the film, or what is the theme that film or the footage can lend itself to. And this method is something a personal favorite for me too, and it's very interesting. Um, I also wanted to think, Wiseman's one of the reasons, film theory can be frustrating for people working in documentary studies is because there is not much there. Apart from the very conventional or the very early film theory, which kind of looks at the early documentary, there is not much theorizing which has happened around non-fiction film. Somehow the narrative of film or the classical Hollywood film has always been the focus of film theory worldwide. Um, but if we try and think Wiseman's cinema in terms of film theory, I borrow some of this from Bill Nichols, of course, who is one of the leading documentary theorists. Um, the first point is, of course, I think it relies a lot. Wiseman's films rely a lot on the effect of voyeurism, in the sense which we can connect to the gaze, as Laura Mulvey called it. But of course, she was talking from a feminist perspective, and how women's bodies are catering to the voyeurism of the male spectator. But in this case, even Frederick Wiseman's footage, since there is no voiceover and a guiding voice, let's say, then you have you are looking at institutions, public institutions, so you're very much interested in you get very much interested in what's going on, what is there, and who are these people, so you want to know what is happening. So there is a certain voyeurism effect which is generated by his work, which is also related to the visual pleasure of it, in the sense the visual pleasure, voyeurism itself is a visual pleasure in some ways. Um, Although Weisman's narrative, I mean, he has no narrative, right? In a broader sense, there is no narrative. In the sense, there is no narrative closure. There is no overall fixed narrative that he wants audience to take back with them. But so that makes his film, because it's sort of all those sequences are one after another. You don't really, even the film ends, you don't really have like a sort of a beginning, middle, end kind of narrative, or which is there. So in that sense, it's experimental. But if you sort of narrow down into particular sequences, like in Welfare, we see different cases being addressed. Within that particular sequence, I feel he's very narrative. He kind of edits it in a narrative, classical cinema way, because you're sort of seeing what is happening with one person's case in this welfare office. All right. So, although overall picture of the welfare office is something which is ambiguous or not clearly enunciated for us, but in short sequences, we know what happened to the what was the problem with each of them, and how it was addressed or not addressed, right? And of course, because there is no voiceover and there is no clear narrative closure, there is indirect address, right? The Weisman films invoke the idea of indirect address, where it's up to the audience to sort of look at, to understand, and also indirect address in terms of camera. There is no one really talking to the camera in his films, right? Neither the people who are featured nor the filmmaker is in camera, nor there is a voiceover. So there is no one directly addressing the audience. So in that way, it's indirect address. It's almost like it's voyeuristic, in the sense that you're present in that institution through Wiseman's camera, and you're just watching the action unfold. And continuing with his idea of nonfiction drama, he embraces the idea of constructed representation of reality. Like Bill Nichols and many others have theorized, documentary is a representation of reality. It is not reality itself, right? And this representation of reality has a constructedness. Why? Because obviously it's edited. So there are choices being made of what is to show, what is not to show in the final version of the film. For example, Weisman's films would have hundreds of hours of footage. So it's at the end of the day, when the film is edited, he makes choices, in the sense that he constructs this representation. The idea that Bill Nichols floats to think of Weisman's structure is the idea of a mosaic, as in there are different facets, like how mosaic is there, but there is no whole. So there is a whole. So the idea of mosaic is what kind of explains. I agree with Bill Nichols here that it kind of explains how Weisman's films are structured, and that is also annoying or rather frustrating for many general audiences in the sense that uh, because they're not really making sense of where this is going, right? Then there is idea we can think of his films as or sequences and the montage as associative rather than expository in the sense that if we go back to the Russian Eisenstein ideas of montage, you're making sense of the sequencing more freely, and you're not tied to one version of it. So there is an associative meaning which is generated, and there is no expository, of course. Um, and also the whole, like the mosaic that we are talking, it allows the narrative to be more poetic, or the film to be more poetic rather than narrative, in the sense that since there is, as I said, there is no beginning, middle, end, then there is a dramatic structure, etc. But there is some poetry to the way it is constructed. It is poetic in its construction rather than being narrative. We can also talk. I mean, we can also think of in terms of Christian Metz ideas of scenes and descriptive syntagmas, and descriptive syntagmas are just to for people who might not know is scene is where scene means a classical narrative structure that there is a character and something is happening to the character and we're watching that unfold, that drama unfold, whereas descriptive syntagma is like like it says here, descriptive syntagma does not convey a sense of temporal progression. Objects shown in successive images only enjoy a relation of spatial coexistence, which is applies quite easily or convincingly to Weisman's film for, like Welfare, because you're all in one office all the time. So there is no the time. And it doesn't matter if the sequences are changed. So the temporal progression is not really requirement in some ways, right? So because we don't know what was shot first, for example, which sequence is shot first, it doesn't matter. So, but it is more interested in that they are happening in this space. Because Weisman also sort of uses social interactions as his primary method of constructing his films. For example, in welfare, the welfare officers are interacting with people seeking welfare, right? So those interactions can also be thought of in terms of Marxist notions of class struggle, because it always seems to, all his films seems to reveal a certain class difference, class struggle between, for example, in welfare, people seeking welfare and officials who have to administer the policies of welfare and disperse welfare to these people. Um, in terms of, like he mentioned in his quote, he did not want to focus on characters. So, in a classical narrative structure, of course, we'll have a hero, etc. But in Wiseman films, we can think of it as multiple uh, heroes who don't really have connections, a narrative connection in the film. They're all individually there in each sequence, for example. And interestingly, if you look at editing, like I said, there is some classical cinema continuity editing which is there inside each sequence, like when he's dealing with one particular person's problem in welfare, like the woman and the daughter. Uh, and initially the couple who come and who are not sure of who's married, who's not married, and all this. So there we sense where we get a sense of a classical cinema structure. There he uses continuity editing, like they come, he follows them, they go to a desk, they talk, there's a, and he kind of tries to give a continuity editing feel and closer to that particular sequence, but rest of it is montage, right? So one sequence to another sequence is not um, not adhering to the forms of continuity editing. So these are some thoughts which I thought it might interest some of you to talk about when we discuss. This is about trying to connect Wiseman's cinema to film theory. Regarding welfare itself, it was shot, I think, in a couple of welfare centers in New York. It was released in 1975, and the structurally the film is structured through interactions between the welfare workers and the people seeking welfare. Um, and it's an interesting revelation of how what are the policies, rules, and how the workers or the officials are trying to work within the laws and rules, and yet kind of try and help the clients they have got or the people who have come for seeking welfare. What is most interesting in films like this is that the element of performance. It feels like people are not either not bothered about the camera or the camera is making them speak more assertively or perform for the camera in some sense. So there is an element of performance which is there, which is very interesting because that's the hardest part in this kind of filmmaking. Because if the people are shy and if they can't go about their work, then you're intruding their workspace. But like we see in welfare, it doesn't look like that. The final film doesn't look like that the filmmakers were intruding in this space and somebody was uncomfortable because the camera was there. That we don't see at all because we see a number of dramatic sequences unfold. Um, it also sort of underlines, of course, because it's an institutional study, we can think of it in terms of sociology, about the role of welfare, and that's how a lot of his films are screened in universities because they're also study of institutions. And in welfare especially, there is a lot of idea sociological study. It's also in sometimes he's also been called a sociological filmmaker, for example, because it sort of is exposing the workings of public institutions, right? Which sociology is very interested in, especially in the things like welfare, healthcare. Yeah, right. So that's an urban settings like in Jackson Heights, for example. So this film kind of gives us some ideas of what role welfare office workers play, at least in the context of America, and what are the laws and rules. For example, many people who have not ever seeked welfare wouldn't have a clue about the nitty-gritties of how these laws work. And sometimes we might also wonder, what if a person doesn't have an identity card, like in the first sequence that we see one person, the Indian, who doesn't have an identity card and he's not being able to avail the welfare. So we kind of see different welfare related issues through the sequences in the film, right? Um, with respect to camera work, I'm very fascinated by framing that he constructs of the faces of the people. That is where sometimes you feel like there is some amount of direct address. For example, I try to put together a collage of, these different sequences where his camera goes into extreme close up, and that is where sometimes we feel we are very intimately observing these particular people. He doesn't do that to the workers or the officials so much, but mostly to the people who are seeking welfare, right? And that's when the camera goes into extreme close up and it almost feels like a direct address. Uh, of course, are there characters? Is a question to talk about for us. There are, of course, dramatic sequences. For example, this sequence where you have a daughter and mother. She's living in North Carolina. Her husband is in New York, and the officials are having a difficult time addressing that case. And the daughter is the one who's standing, is really upset about the way her mother is not being helped, and that leads to a crescendo almost of conflict, which is very similar to, say, for example, another narrative film. And that also leads to this character, this person or the official, who actually is exploding in the film, which is very interesting because she sort of gets angry. She gets into verbal battles with the people seeking welfare. Initially, also, she's frustrated because she doesn't have enough workers. So it kind of throws light on some of these. These dramatic sequences around this person are quite interesting. I thought also this person's dramatic has couple of dramatic sequence in the end and in the middle where he says nothing we can do, and that person is asking for, what do I do for the food for the day, and he says nothing more than I can do, go and figure it out. So it's kind of it's an interesting revelation, and probably sociologists have a way of thinking about these kind of behavior of social welfare officials. And it's understandable, of course. It also reveals that they are human at the end of the day, no matter how much they're working at an office of the state. Right. Yeah. So there's some, and what I wanted us to think about also, what are the aspects of the institution itself that the film doesn't cover? That's something, I have some thoughts on it, but I guess we can also talk about in the discussion. So I'm not going to put my thoughts here on that, but it's important to think of from an institutional perspective, what are the aspects of this welfare institution that we don't see in the film, right? This sequence also is very dramatic. It also sort of brings in the idea of race in the film. Till then, it is not really. It's there in, of course, race is always there, but it's there. But it's in this we have a sort of a direct confrontation between a client and a cop, and a long discourse around racial relations in 70s America. So it's quite interesting. And of course, Frederick Wiseman, being the filmmaker he is, he captures it for the drama it evokes. Right. So to end with, without taking too much time, I just wanted to put up some discussion prompts for us to think about and discuss. Hopefully, you might already have some thoughts to share, but I just thought this also. For example, what does welfare reveal about American welfare system? Um, and also the question of, from our context, for example, India, and anyone else who is here from elsewhere, how we connect the welfare systems we are familiar with with the welfare system of America, which is exhibited in the film. Are there commonalities, uh, or are there differences? Right. I also wanted us to sort of maybe think a little bit about what is the effect of observational form when there is no guiding voiceover, and there is no, and because it invites the audience to participate in meaning making. Right. It is not, and that to make invitation is not really embraced generally by audiences. Like, for example, whenever I show this film in undergrad class, and if they are first year undergrads especially, they find it very frustrating to watch it for 2 hours, 3 hours, because because we tend to, because we are so fed by the narrative films, that if we can't make sense of it in the first 15 minutes or something, we tend to lose the anchoring, and the length of the films also make that challenging, right? um, what do you think of the framing strategies in the film? We talked a little bit about extreme close-up, but what do you think of some of the other shots that he brings in, which are apart from the faces and the dramatic sequences? What is the nature of relationship the camera is able to forge with people featured, and how does this play, for example, especially in documentaries that we are familiar with? What do you think of the structure of the film? How can we think of the question of documentary ethics with respect to this film? This is something I really want to talk about, because there are a lot of questions, and as a filmmaker myself, these are questions we get confronted with every time we go to film someone's story, or someplace. So, what are these questions exactly, and how does Wiseman approach these questions is something we can talk about. And what are the ideological implications of the formal choices like the observational and no voiceover, etc.? What if we think of it in terms of ideology, and then what is it sort of trying to convey to us, and what does it reveal about Weisman himself and his social status, let's say? Yeah, so this is pretty much the my presentation. So thank you for being patient and listening to me. I'll leave it here somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for this discussion. It was truly insightful and enriching. Now, I would like to invite the participants to share their views on especially the discussion prompts that Sir had shared.
Can I come in, Srija?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Basav. Thank you very much for taking us through, the whole background about Wiseman's style before you came to actually the film Welfare. And yes, it is a long film, and these days I think we are getting more and more unused to watching these long films. So, to that extent, yes, it is a difficult watch, but extremely interesting, fascinating, because um, as you rightly said, there are no forced perspectives. There is no text or voiceover or any no interviews like you see in traditional documentaries. So we as spectators are kind of called into bearing witness to what is happening out there with these people. And what I found really sad is that each of these applicants, that for the welfare schemes that are shown in the film, they have to actually justify their suffering in order to access their checks and the schemes that they are entitled to. And so, in that sense, the film is less about welfare per se and more about the lived experiences of these people who have to, constantly navigate institutional power. And there is also uh, a great deal of psychological toll of poverty on these people. So it's almost as if like humiliation is embedded into the welfare system itself. But at the same time, I must say that these people are not necessarily passive victims, but like if we pay attention to their arguments, they do come across as extremely intelligent, articulate, and aware of their rights. And it is just that they are pitted against a hostile system. So, in that sense, this very Kafkaesque space of that office, which is dispersing these funds, it becomes a kind of site of human drama. Uh, it is slow, it is impersonal, and there is this whole how do I put it, circularity of time. There is endless waiting, then we see the same people returning to claim again and again. The dialogues also are sometimes repetitive. But somewhere in the midst of all this, I also felt that the officials are still, I would say, rather kind, patient. There is hardly any, raising of voices, except towards the end, you also showed the image of that caseworker. She is one of the few who actually get a bit, animated, but otherwise, they're all quite, calm and so these are, kind of some of the thoughts I had about the film. And it's there is one fiction film by Ken Loach. I think it's called I, Daniel Blake. So I was kind of reminded of that film because that's also about, an individual caught in this whole bureaucratic system of welfare. That is, of course, in the context of UK. This is US. So thank you very much, Basav.
Yeah, just want to point out that Ken Loach's filmography also, he always made films only on issues based cinema, so to say. So, but the crucial difference there is that Ken Loach's films follow one character, the standard classical cinema narrative structure.
Yes.
Would anyone like to say anything? Nikhila ma'am, would you please?
Yeah, Basav, thanks. I mean, we have come to expect something as wonderful as this from you each time you are on TFO, and it was great listening to you. Truly very, very educative. In fact, it reminded me, especially when you were talking about it, I was reminded of your own film on the runners. Because it seems to follow, a somewhat similar kind of rhythm, not just foregrounding one particular runner, but kind of mapping the dynamics among them. About this film itself, I was, completely awestruck by the unawareness, so to speak, of the camera. I mean, how was this filmed was something I kept asking myself. How was it filmed in order to make it look like they are all impervious of the camera, where they are not afraid to bring out parts which one might normally hide. So, they seem to be talking about it as if it did not matter. So I was quite awestruck by what kind of comfort did the filmmakers evoke. That it seemed like the camera, the subjects are not even aware of, or look like they are not aware of the camera. The second thing, of course, is the seamlessness. So, for instance, this whole idea of time, how long, over how many days did all this happen? Was it one day? Was it over 1 month? So did people come back? Within each narrative, there are points of reference, but then we don't know whether they're coming back the next day or it is the same, so emptied of all these markers. Temporality is one very important marker of narrative cinema. So as you said, this is also kind of killed. So we are left to wonder. And also, there is something so tantalizing in allowing us to live with uncertainty. So what happened to this person? So as we watch each case, it's so engrossing, and we do identify. But then immediately you cut to the next person, and then there is another story, and then we get engrossed in that, and we don't know what happens to that. So it's also a different way, I would think, of watching films, where your desire to know the whole story, so to speak, is not available to you. Another aspect, I thought, in relation to the earlier film that you had discussed on the New York Public Library, there it is about the transformation that the library is undergoing, and what is its role in a digitalizing era? What is its role? How is it finding its relevance through a new set of activities and so on? So I was thinking about the institution of welfare in that context. So what is it? What is this, supposed to be saying? Is it, is it saying something about the nature of America's democracy? Is it talking about a particular period of change? This larger context was not so very clear with this film, So I was just wondering. And a lot of times, as Geeta said, it reminded me also of Tabarana Kate or films like that, where you just go and knock on a system which is unresponsive to you. But again, as Geeta said, these are not just victims who will just fade away or die. It was wonderful to see, their it was like a right that they demanded. So this accountability from the state that was clearly visible, I thought was very, very interesting in the film. So this Tocquevillean notion of civil society and state. So I was thinking about, how this state, American state is, and how welfare is not just the state's magnanimity, but a right that these people seem to think of as it should come to them, or so just some stray thoughts. Thanks overall, Basav. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. And like you rightly said, there is no narrative closure for us. And that leaves, that's what I think many times people feel frustrated about the film. But I think that's the point to what happens to each of them is also what makes the film to be, thought of as a film about the institution rather than about these particular characters who are sort of coming to get welfare. What I find interesting is that although we tend to think of it in a David versus Goliath kind of, I don't know, somehow I feel that the film sort of breaks that idea in the sense of that the state is not evil because they're all trying to somehow help figure out a way to. There are some, but I think what comes between the welfare seekers and the welfare disbursers is the or administers is the laws and rules. So if I have to give you some money, I need this. I need an address. I need so. I think that's what the film reveals quite emphatically is what I thought because it sort of reveals that it's like the situation of Aadhaar and welfare in India too, right? If you don't have Aadhaar as a daily wage worker or a MNREGA worker, you won't get the benefit, right? So it's similar to those kind of issues. It sort of accentuates not so much that these people are evil or these people are of course there is some sadness there, but somehow I don't know, I don't feel that like you would feel, say, for example, in Tabaranakate where there is corruption and all that, right? But here there is sort of, here there is, the reality of it is that there are people who are doing their job, doing their job well, and then there are people who are seeking welfare, and the roadblock is the system in some way. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your response. The floor is now open to all, so I would like to invite the participants to share their comments, observations, and insights. Um, anyone, if they want to speak, you can unmute yourself and go
Hello.
ahead. Yes, please.
Uh, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Uh, Thanks for your wonderful discussion. Uh, I want to just, I was thinking to ask a little more about, you were mentioning briefly about indirect address and the voyeuristic gaze while you were speaking about the film. So, in terms of this particular film, could you, like, as it's a part of the cinema verite movement, like this Wiseman's films are part of the cinema verite. So, could you briefly mention how would you distinguish these two particular things in terms of this cinema, like indirect address or the voyeuristic cinema? Like, voyeuristic cinema is always part of the fictional narrative, as we all know. So, could you just briefly discuss a little bit more? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the idea of voyeuristic cinema to Wiseman applies in the sense that the reality of the drama. For example, we can already see that the pleasure we have in this film I mean, I'm calling it pleasure in the theoretical sense, not happiness, right? So the pleasure is in seeing this dramatic sequences of, poor people not getting and like knowing about their lives. Like Geeta mentioned, she was very sad to see. So that is also, the voyeuristic pleasure, and it is voyeuristic because we are it's the way the film is made is like we are present there, but since the characters or the film people featured in the film are not directly looking at the camera or anything, like how the camera is absent if in their mind, and if you take the idea of transcendental vision of Baudry, etc., then we are the camera, right? We are looking at the spectator is so we are so then like Hitchcock's Rear Window, we are there, we are seeing what is happening in the everywhere. So and we are seeing without them seeing us. That's what makes it voyeuristic, right? So that's I mean, in the idea of course narrative and Laura Mulvey, etc., there is a lot of feminist theory there with respect to the women's bodies and fragmentation and all that. But here also I feel that, for example, we don't know their names, we don't know, we don't have a desire for narrative closure. It's almost like we are just walking around this office and seeing the most dramatic moments and sort of enjoying them, sort of thing, right? So it's almost like that. So that's what I meant by the voyeuristic pleasure which is there. And indirect address is of course tied to it because there is nobody in the film is directly addressing us, the audience, right? Neither the people are looking into camera and speaking to camera, or you know, like in a document, like a conventional documentary, they might speak to the camera, or we might see the interviewer briefly asking a question. Like in TV, for example, you always see a journalist asking a question and somebody answering the question, right? So that kind of thing is not there. So then there is and everything that is happening is indirect, right? We are not told anything directly at all. There is no voiceover, which is again a direct address. So there is no that way. So the only address we have is indirect through the images that are constructed. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Also, I was just part of the like why I was asking this because the cinema verite movement, this has a different kind of as he's part of this movement, like himself, he was like saying this. So yeah, thank you so much for the answer.
Thank
It
you
was
so much.
helpful.
And the cinema verite is also, I mean, if you think of cinema verite, it is not just observational, right? There were it's very ambiguous, the whole cinema verite term itself, because even films like Chronicle of a Summer is actually the foundational film of cinema verite, right? But it has only interviews, right? It has on-camera interviews, right? So, and this style is where you're sort of,
Also,
yeah.
and other like yeah. So that this is part of the different kind of way approaching, and you that's why I mentioned the voyeuristic gaze. Yeah, that's I
Yeah.
mean now it's much more clear on which sense you use. So that's was part of my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I come in?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Can I come in?
Yes, ma'am. Sure,
Yes,
please.
thank you very much because was a very well constructed, clear, and inspiring presentation. I think labeling Wiseman cinema is very interesting. Of course, is in the air of, as you said, of cinema vérité. Cinema truth, vérité in French means truth, and is copied. Wiseman is largely copied in France, not only by cinematographer but also by scholars and people like me who did visual anthropology. My professor was Jean Rouch, and I think he was very much influenced by Jean Rouch, who did a Chronicle of a Summer with a sociologist called Edgar Morin. But so labeling this cinema is also important for me because I am in directly in the heritage of this cinema. Because what he did really is ethnography. And sometime I think Welfare 1975 film is really ethnographic. Maybe more than others, than real ethnographers. You know, Jean Rouge, for example, as I know his cinema very well, he was my professor. Jean Rouge provoked the scenes, he provoked things. And what I really like with Wiseman, he doesn't make any provocation. He's not neutral, but he doesn't push toward action like Jean Rouge did. Jean Rouge was pushing the action and was elevating the story, pushing the story, not Weisman. So I think he's really, his cinema has some virtue, ethnographical virtue. And especially his message is very interesting in the film Welfare. Because what it demonstrates is that aid workers and applicants, both of them, are helpless, facing the institution. It's a critic of the system, and with no interviews, he can really describe a whole system. And maybe last character is so interesting, you know, the man with the glasses coming from the middle class. I mean, this is the peak of the film, and it's a synthesis, a synopsis of everything, because he was a middle class man. He had a good job, good education, and he's lost everything. And what Wiseman tell us is that anybody of us can become like this man with glasses. Nobody is protected. And if you become like this man, you will find yourself really in trouble, because you will have no help from the system. And we are in the 70s. I think it's even worse today in America. And last time when I spoke about the film of Brigitte Bardot, The Ravishing Idiot, we made some presentation about this film. I was asking why some films do age, seem old. You know, this film of Wiseman, 1975, could have made yesterday, and it could have made in France. If I go to the social security downtown, I will find exactly the same thing. People don't listen. The head workers, they it's not because they're mean. They are helpless. They don't have the tools, and they are, during the film you hear the typewriter all the time. It's very loud, so it gives a message of being very active, very active. But in the same time, they say, "Oh, go there. You have to go this other place." They have difficulty to solve situation, being so active, and I think it's exactly the same here in the Western world, in France. And I think in the UK, if you go to Italy, I think I would say it's the same thing. People being very, very busy in the administration and solving very little thing, and not because they are bad people, but because the system is imposing his uselessness. And I think this film is so interesting, and it shows also that anthropology doesn't age. Every time you go for true cinema, like Chronic of a Summer is not aging. When you try to really be honest with a situation, your film become an archive, but never age. So I think this is a very good film to show to the students. And also, Wiseman methodology is so interesting because it was so free. And he used 50% of his rushes. You know, most, even me, I use only 10% of my rush. Who uses 50%? And who makes film of 2 hour and a half? Nobody except Wiseman. And it's a force and it's a weakness because sometimes it's too long. Today, I would cut his film because there is two weaknesses: the sound, too much sound, the typewriter, people shouting. There must be a sound hierarchy in a film. You know what you cannot put the sound, all the sounds on the same level. And I guess it's because the microphones in the 70s were not as good as the microphones today. So the sound goes in multiple directions. So it's like a mess and it's very difficult to listen. You get very tired because of these messy sounds. And the other weakness, I would say, of the film is the length. Some testimonies are too long, some are really interesting, and some are too long. Like another testimony that was so interesting was the couple. I don't know if you remember. She didn't even know that her
Yeah,
partner was
yeah,
not married, and
yeah.
they discovered each other inside the office of an institution. So it's fascinating. I think that the things he gets from the people is completely fascinating. But sometimes, to my opinion, because we are in 2000, in 2026, it is too long. But being long also, it's a good thing. It's a resistance to the format that the television is imposing. So it's also a freedom that I really appreciate in the same time. But thank you so much for seeing this film once again. I think it's a key film to show to the students um, ci- uh, in cinema, because it showed them that with nothing they can do a film that can be ageless, an ageless film with very small budget. And I think when we do festival and when we push the student to do their own film, it's important to show Wiseman methodology, because the freedom Wiseman offered to himself can be shared with other people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to respond to a couple of points there. One is around ethnography. I think the difference, a lot of ethnographic filmmakers have with Voiceman, the difference they kind of want to point out is that ethnography is a much longer sort of investment of time with the community, etc., to arrive at the film eventually, whereas
Yes,
Voiceman's is more, yeah. So that's the primary difference. Otherwise, the formal approaches are similar. Yeah. Yeah, and the secondly, the independent nature of his filmmaking is quite interesting, and also I think like what Professor Nicola was also saying about, and I mentioned about the performance in front of the camera. It's also due to the small crew. If you go 10 people in a welfare office, then obviously there is a lot
yes,
of intimidation. So if because he was only going always until his death, he only made films with 3 people as crew. It sort of makes a big difference in the way people respond to the camera. Yeah. Thank you so much.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks to you, because it was a pleasure to see that film again.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Would anyone like to ask any question? Bharati, sir.
Yeah, I'm Srijan here.
Oh, yes, yes, sure.
Thank you, Basav sir, for such a wonderful discussion. I have, I think, 2 points. First is about the narrative technique of the film. As was discussed earlier, also there was no guiding voice throughout the film, as it is a direct cinema. But while watching the film, I noticed something, that if you talk about the audio of the film, I mean, if you listen to it very carefully, so there is sometimes the audios gets mixed up. I mean, one character is speaking, suddenly another audio came into it, and the camera directly changed after that, and the new character came into the picture. So I find that if you combine both this audio and camera, there is certain guiding point when you know the when the camera is going to change, when the view is going to change. And if I'm not wrong, probably Wiseman himself is the audio is in charge of the audio here, and I think John Davy was the cinematographer. So can you now say that even though there is the absence of this, I mean, narrative voice within the film, this subtle mixing of sounds and camera technique kind of guide us through the film, especially when there is a this painfully long shots are there. So I think can we not talk about this guiding technique? If, I don't know if Wiseman did it like deliberately, or is it because of the restriction that there are so less number of views. So whenever you are going through the set, you are taking the microphone with you, and the change of the position of the microphone also comes into the picture with it. That's my question, sir.
Yeah, obviously, that's why I said it's constructed reality, right? So there are two parts to it. One, while filming itself, but because, like we talked about, there is no pre sort of preparation of what is welfare and a script, for example, there is no script, right? So a lot of the filming is just intuitive, right? So the intuition is guiding you to move from one person talking to another person. So the two things which sort of make it Wiseman's film and not a film is that the intuition, it is to because you're making decision what to film and at what point, and secondly editing, right? Because you're editing, so you're constructing this whole reality of this welfare office. For example, I brought up the topic of what the film doesn't cover. For example, we don't see much of what is happening among the officers itself. Only one brief sequence where somebody is cribbing that she's not being promoted and she's being discriminated against, right? One of the case workers of the office. But otherwise, we don't really see what is. So we only rely on the interaction between the state officials and the welfare seekers, whereas we don't have a window into what is going on within the office so much behind, right? So there is, I think, so it's not like this all-seeing view of the institution itself. So that's also tells us that he is selecting what we are supposed to see, obviously, right? So no film is truth, right? That's why the term cinema verite itself is a um, debated about term, because there is no real, and that's why I didn't like it also, the term. So he calls it non-fiction drama rather than calling it documentary or observational or anything, because you're not just observing, you're making decisions to what to observe, right? Observational, the term seems to indicate that, okay, you're just sitting in one place and observing, but that's not true. You are using your intuition to decide what to observe, right? So obviously that part is there. So, but the idea of narrative is meaning of narrative is something else, right? Narrative is where there is a the story graph and there is a there is a character. What happens to the character? Character runs into a difficulty. Then there is a resolution at the end of it. That is what is narrative, not whether it's true or real or not, right? So the idea of narrative is different than impression of reality that the film gives you, right? So there are two different things we are talking about. So of course, every film, even if you're making an Instagram reel, it is constructed. Even if you're just filming a bus or a train, it's fiction, right? At the end of the day, or it's your point of view because you have the camera in your hand. But that's not the narrative. That narrative is where at least the classical narrative, how we think of it, right? So classical narrative is where there is a story graph and there's a closure at the end of it. This doesn't have a closure. I mean, the film could have gone on for 5 hours more. We wouldn't have learned something different, right? We would have just seen more people coming for welfare, more dramatic sequences. So there is, so it doesn't have a really, it's like Geeta mentioned, there is a certain circularity to it. If we had only two cases also, it wouldn't have made difference. If it was just half an hour also, it wouldn't have made a much difference in terms of what we understand from a content perspective. But the longer immersion, of course, has other implications of the diversity of the different kind of issues we see from an institutional perspective to so different kind of problems basically we see. But yeah, I hope it's clear that there is a narrative is not about constructing reality, that constructedness of it, but narrative is more about story in the way I am using it here. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I think I have watched one film long ago. It is about the entire film is about one man sleeping throughout the film. He has fallen asleep and he woke up. I forgot the name. It was a very old film. So when we was discussing the film, we are talking about that there is a story in the film. Basically, a man is sleeping as a story, but what the film lacks is any action. I mean, Weisman's films follows throughout the narrative and there is a continuous repetition. I mean, if you just change the character, the conversations are almost same. So I think there is a this repetitions of action and similar action is going on again and again throughout the narrative. Thank you, sir.
Yes, that's true. And what you thought about, like, there's always a story in everything if you want to see, right? So, like, even if I take a clip of, empty road, you can always have some interpretation of it. But when we are talking of narrative in terms of film theory, we are talking of the classical cinema narrative, like the Hollywood narrative or the Bollywood narrative, or, which has a certain structure we understand. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your response. Would anyone else like to go forward with their observations and comments? Madhurima ma'am, Tarakeshwar sir, if you are available, could you please share your insights? If there's anyone else who wants to ask any question or share any observations, please. Okay, then if no one has any other question, I would like to. I just have a small question for you. You told about documentary ethics, and you have told us that you would want to speak about them later on. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd be very happy.
Yes, I was hoping somebody will bring that up. Thank you so much. So, documentary ethics is it's very I mean it's very interesting of thinking of Wiseman's films in terms of ethics, because a lot of it today would be considered or always considered unethical, in the sense that how much of like he's very interested in capturing the pathos or the troubles of the people who are coming to seek welfare. So it goes to extreme close up to show their faces of agony, like the opening sequence where the Indian is sort of arguing about how he's discriminated against all men. So we kind of in that we have to also realize that the permission Weisman has from the institution is to film within the institution, and that permission is from the institution, not necessarily from that individual. So the individual, so what is the idea of consent in such a film, right? Because the old lady who has come for welfare, uh, has she consented to her images being watched by people like us for many years? So what is the idea of consent, right? So and how is Wiseman sort of not seem to be interested in it in many ways? He's sort of because if he is interested in it, then he wouldn't get the kind of footage he's getting, obviously, because then he cannot stop filming and say, can I film you, or all those things. So there is a questions like that, and that's very difficult for a filmmaker. In my work also, I face it all the time, because you don't know whether you want to, say, film a poor man sitting roadside or not. Is it because that person doesn't know what you're going to do with his footage. So what is the then what is the ethical in the approach? So these kind of questions, like, I mean, we are getting into the private stories of, for example, the sequence that Fabian was talking about the husband wife. We are kind of so closely watching them. The camera is close up to them, and then when they are discussing whether she's married or not, and there seems to be some misunderstanding there, it is a private matter, right? So at the end of the day, so how Wiseman seems to be very comfortable entering those situations. When you're interviewing, it might be easier to do that. That's why a lot of people prefer interview, because you will ask, I'll ask about this question, and then sort of you ask that question and that person answers. But here you are not doing that. You are entering the private spaces of each welfare seeker without really permission. But that is what gives him the spontaneity of the, or the truth, so called, of the footage. So then there is so these are ethical concerns, and it's very difficult. This form is very difficult from that perspective, because you, like, if an institution is funding you, you wouldn't be able to make this kind of film, because there are a lot of, for example, there is a film of Wiseman called Law and Order, which is about police, and in one of the sequences the police are actually choking a girl. It's a So then it becomes the question of, then there is also that question of, okay, as somebody who's there, are you going to stop that violence, or are you going to just film it? So see, that's again ethical question you are confronted with, right? Even in this film, like, he's seeing that fight between the cops and the white guy, which is like a racially charged fight, and they eventually throw that white old person out of the welfare office. It's very charged. I mean, imagine being there with the camera right next to them. Then what is going through your mind? You need to have really resolved the ethical questions in your head to be able to film that. Otherwise, the temptation would be to say, why not I intervene and say, no, wait, why are you getting so worked up? Try to resolve the situation and stuff like that. Or you just film it. So that's the question choices you have. So, and in a lot of Wiseman films, because they're either filming, like in Ticket Follies, it's mentally ill patients. The mentally ill patient doesn't have the agency to decide if they can be filmed or not filmed, and you're intimately filming them in an asylum. So does it make, then what is ethical of it? So all of his films have this kind of, I think, ethically charged questions which can be discussed about, I feel, and which is not, which documentary practice obviously comes with, because you're dealing with real people and their lives. Yeah.
Thank you for your response, sir. I was actually thinking about documentary ethics for a long time. I mean, I've been watching a couple of documentaries before welfare as well. And this question came up in my mind, and I loved your perspective on it. So moving forward, I would just like to ask if anyone else has any question, observation, or comments. They can go forward and share them. If not, then we'll conclude the session. Okay, so I think no one has anything to say as of now. So it was such an interesting discussion. I'm personally very, very happy to hear you. And I'm here for the first time hearing this. I wish you, I first of all want to thank all the participants who have joined us today. And thank you to Geeta ma'am and Nikhila ma'am for making this happen. And thank you, sir, for this enlightening discussion. Good night to everyone. If anyone would like to conclude the session, if anyone or Geeta, please.
Mute.
Ma'am, you are on mute.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just saying good night and hope to see you again coming Saturday. Thank you, Basav. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good
Bye.
night.
Yeah, team members, please stay back. Team TFO.
Yeah.